So I have been watching old episodes of WW2's Poirot set in the 1930s, and it set me off wanting to do an Art Deco 1930s dress. And I have quite a few patterns sitting around waiting to be done, and I chose this one, which is a butterick. Are you interested? It's a butterick, what it calls a delineator style, and I chose version C because although the version with the pleats is lovely, the instructions said to cut a band and send to the pleater, which does show you how there were many more home dressmakers then, and it was kind of easier to find a pleater. So I chose version C, and one of the reasons I chose version C as well was that my mother has crocheted me. It's a crochet pattern from the 1930s, and correct me please in the comments if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but I just read it as jabot. So jabots, hopefully that's okay, really popular in the 30s, and she crocheted me this one. So I wanted a dress that would be in keeping with the period that this jabot was designed, and so the 1930s, and would have a sort of front that would be appropriate for showing it off. And I have a wonderful, very muted pink wartime era rayon. It's not the best to sew with. It's very slippy, silky and slippy, so lovely drape, but very slippy and silky. It frays like anything, and it would be very hard to unpick without destroying it. But apart from that, it's great. No, it is very pretty. So I shall get on and show you how I sewed the dress, and of course the reveal at the end. So having stared at and read the instructions for quite a while, I started to pin the pattern pieces onto the fabric with the help of my friends. It's a wartime fabric, so it's quite narrow in width. Oh, aren't they awful? It's quite narrow in width, but they made sure that the print didn't just go in one direction. And this allows you to be quite economic in the way that you cut out the pieces. As you can see, I have my very own fabric weight. This fabric has a floral print with bunches of flowers that face both up and down, with a kind of trellis. And the dogs relaxed on the sofa while I grovelled around on the floor, which they consider entirely appropriate. And I wanted to show you how massive the sleeves are. That's just one bodice piece placed on top of a sleeve, and I'm worrying about having enough fabric because I've got the two sleeves. Oh, the dogs, it's just too exciting for them. And I've also got this piece called the plastron, which drapes over the bodice at the front. I started by stitching the front to the back at the side seams, leaving a gap on the left for the fastenings, and also stitching the bust darts in the front, and then also stitching part way up the shoulder seams, leaving the part from the notched unstitched, and that's so that you can get your head through. And then the neck edge and the part of the shoulder seam that's been left unstitched, they're all finished with bias binding, my favourite after the walkaway dress challenge, but not as much bias binding as that. So they're finished by bias binding around the neck. So this is the bodice with the bias strip stitched on and then slip stitched down into position on the underside, and then I've cut strips to bind the openings at the shoulders with, so that is stitched on like this, right side to right side, and then it will turn under and overlap for the press studs to be stitched on. So I'll show you on this sleeve that I've initially pinned wrong side to wrong side because I'm going to do French seams. So stitching initially wrong side to wrong side, turning over, pressing, and then stitching right sides together to enclose the seam, because this is a nice straight seam and the fabric is quite fine, so suitable for French seams. But I wanted to show you how, so that's the arm closure, which is quite usual. Then you've got the armhole, and then you've got the sleeves that actually extend in a straight line from the shoulder. So quite an unusual sleeve for today, but a lovely classic Art Deco line. And then the sleeves at the base, you stitch to about here, leaving an unstitched area down to the wrist. Tell you to cut a lap, which would be probably what we would call a placket, and very much in exactly the same way that I did for the shoulders. So cutting a placket that will enclose that unstitched area on each side, and then it's fastened with poppers or press studs so that you get your hands through. The base sleeves will just be hemmed in the usual way. This is an interesting piece from a 1930s pattern, as you can see, called a plastron. Cut one on the bias, and I'll just unpin it, and here we are. And you turn that square, it's hemmed down each side and then gathered at the top and at the base as well. And then this is the band for the plastron. I had to piece it together because as you can see, I ran out of fabric. And you sew this band with stitching up into the centre on each side so that you can then turn it through to the right side. And this is the band for the plastro turned right side out, and I've pressed it, and you can see it's just got that opening there, and this will be the end that then ties at the back. The top, the gathers are pulled up and fitted into the gap that was left in that band there, so it could be gathered up into that band at the top, and then this ties around the back of the neck. Actually, we'll go over the bodice front. It's hemmed down the edges so it's not attached at the sides to the bodice. It's attached at the top to the band, which ties around the neck. The lower edge of the plastron is then gathered up and attached to the front of the bodice between markings on the pattern, and then the whole of the bodice with the plastron attached is also gathered so that the gathers can then be adjusted when they're stitched onto the skirt. And then in the back skirt is this really elegant design of having a pleat each side, so you can just see that I've pinned those pleats in position, stitch part of the way down on each side, and then the pleat will then flare out towards the bottom of the skirt. That's just on the back. The front of the skirt is left plain. I'm going to pin the side seams and put in French seams again to leave a gap at the left side. Fasten with, they say, press studs, but I find, and who can know why, that if I have press studs around my middle, they tend to unpop themselves. So I'm going to put it in a zip actually, but I am going to put in hooks and eyes on the placket because I find they're a bit more liable to stay fastened after a meal. And then once the skirt side seams are sewn together and those pleats are ready, it will be just stitched onto the bodice. And then hang the dress up to hem. These are just at the neckline works that you make what they call this lap or placket, sew on the poppers, and then you can get your head through and then fasten those. And there's a similar arrangement on the sleeves at the wrists. And with the plastro attached at the waist and to the band at the top, you just tie it like a halter neck in a bow around the back of your neck. So here's the sleeve, and as with the pumpkin dress, I kind of want these unusually shaped 30 sleeves, and then when I see them, I start having my doubts. So this is the line that extends down over the shoulders, and it looks a bit futuristic, doesn't it? You might be commanding a sort of starship. You just don't know with 30 sleeves until you put the dress on. You don't really know quite what shape they're going to form. And I just wanted to show you the back. You form these pleats on the inside of the skirt, and then you stitch them on the outside, a layer of top stitching, but to form a point. They call it a dark tuck. It comes down to a dark point, and the skirt then flares out in that classic 30s shape. Raisin Rabbit relaxing there while I'm sewing, hoping for a tummy rub. But she's out of luck this time because I'm parading around in my new dress looking just like Miss Lemon from the back, and hopefully her style from the front too. So as you can see, this 30s dress has that classic elongated silhouette, and I am wearing a 30s girdle to achieve that smooth look, and also a 1940s grey velvet hat with roses that I got from lovely Olivia after the dance on Instagram. And you can see that the 30 sleeves are actually fall like a kind of origami, and the jabot looks really pretty on this dress. I think I'm just showing you that sort of origami effect. I needn't have worried that they were going to stand out in the point because they just drape down in folds, which is such a 30s Art Deco look. And this fabric might have been a tricky one to sew, but it really does add to the whole period feel of this dress. It does look more authentic to use a fabric. Actually not from quite the same era. The fabric's a little later from the wartime era, whereas the pattern is more kind of mid-30s. Like the design for the jabot is too, as well as the Art Deco belt buckle that I got from the Vintage Sewing Nook on Instagram as well. And I really am keen on these 30 sleeves. I know I have a little panic every time I sew them, but they're so fascinating. Thank you so much for watching me. Please consider subscribing and giving this video a like.